Hello, and welcome back to the AI Decision Maker Summit. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Elizabeth Smith, Senior Director, Data Privacy and Associate General Counselor at CGen, which was recently acquired by Pfizer. We are excited to have Elizabeth and Conor with us for their fireside chat titled Harnessing the Power of Generative AI for Customer Success. Welcome, Elizabeth, and over to you.
Thanks, Brittany. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Again, my name is Elizabeth Smith, and I have been a privacy lawyer for 23 years, working at a variety of different companies, and am really excited to spend this time with you, talking with you and Conor about AI. And I'm going to turn it over to Conor to give himself an introduction. Conor Twomey, take it away.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, folks. My name is Conor Twomey. I'm dialed in from New York City, a snowy New York City today. I run customer success here at KX, and I've had the pleasure of working here for over 14 years. My career is kind of split into two. The first half of my career as a software engineer and data scientist, solving some really interesting data challenges for top Fortune 500 companies, ranging from financial services to Formula One race teams to healthcare and beyond. And so our technology fundamentally is an in-the-moment decisioning software. We accelerate the time to knowledge and shorten the time to decision-making around big data assets, whether that's structured data or now unstructured data as well. Over the last 7 years, I've worked in more of an advisory capacity, supporting our customers with a real focus on outcomes and use cases. And I spend all of my time really speaking with customers and clients to understand their pain points and to help bring some of these emerging technologies to bear to help them generate enterprise value. So delighted to be here today, and Elizabeth, delighted to chat with you as well.
Thank you. So let's just jump right in. So Conor, nothing has gripped our collective conscience like AI for the last year or so, and with good reasons. Can you talk to us about its potential and what businesses that you're working with are using it to address?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. A lot of people ask this question, and it's really to understand where generative AI sits on the hype cycle. And so we've seen similar hype cycles in the past, whether it was cloud back in 2013, 2014, blockchain 2015, 2016, and discriminative AI, which emerged around the same time. The real thing that separates generative AI is the language context, the ability to program using your natural language, whether it's English, whatever it might be, your home country. And this really allows generative AI to act as the connective tissue of all of those prior technologies. So things that would have involved big teams, data engineers, data scientists, app builders, can now all be harnessed from a business user perspective. A lot of what we're seeing is around automation. A lot of it is really about the ability to extract meaningful information from untapped potential. And so with organizations that we deal with, very often up to 80% of their data assets live in an unstructured format. And now the ability through generative AI to really extract information, knowledge, or signal from that unstructured data allows them to operate their businesses more efficiently, more effectively, but more nimbly as well. And really what the promise, and it's being delivered that we're seeing already, is the ability to allow organizations harness their entire data estate when it comes to decision making, allowing them to operate at scale. So this really isn't just another hype cycle. When we saw discriminative AI emerge as an example, and I think we were going to send a poll question potentially asking about the difference between discriminative and generative AI. So I don't want to front run that. But with discriminative AI, in 500 plus customer conversations, I could count literally on two hands the number of meaningful use cases that emerged. And genuinely, none of them more interesting or more sophisticated than a Netflix recommendation engine. Like, hey, I've got 10 things to do. I've only got time to do two of them. Can you help recommend where I should spend my time and my focus? And that did deliver a tremendous amount of value to people, but it was still hidden behind a barrier of technology. You needed to be a technologist. It wasn't for every person in every business in every sector in every part of the world. And that's where generative AI is really different. It's the accessibility, reducing that barrier to be able to adopt these sort of technologies.
So would that recommendation case study, would that be kind of your top one, or do you have another one that you want to kind of bring to us as a thing that, like, oh, maybe that's something that I can, look at and adapt or adopt into my business?
Yeah, I think, Elizabeth, that's certainly something that we saw emerge from discriminative AI back in 2017. And really, when it comes to generative AI, what we're seeing is two paths really emerging. One is a horizontal path and another is a vertical path. The horizontal path is, how can I give a little efficiency gain to as many of my employees or my team members as possible? So how can I turn a search experience into something that understands semantic meaning? So it doesn't have to be a literal search. You can, if you wanted to talk about movies, you don't need to know exactly what movie you're looking for. You can just describe it as an example. And so really what we're seeing is people who are adopting this technology to give little performance improvements, giving people back 40 minutes of their week or an hour a week as a core goal. So that allows them not so much as a cost takeout discussion, but really more of a, how can we make sure that our staff are really focused on the company mission, on the company vision, and delivering an excellent experience for our end customers by removing some of the administrative burden through automation. So that's really what we're seeing as the horizontal discussion. And the vertical discussion then is far more industry or sector or company type specific, which is, what are the new services that I can bring to my end customers as a result of this technology? By being able to tap into data sets that live disparately and joining them together. Can I be more responsive? Can I be more accurate? Can I make a better offering? And so what we're really seeing is, in the verticalized space, improved services, vastly improved services. And in an exciting way, that leads to revenue growth. So it's not just about a cost efficiency. How many staff can I remove from my workforce or from the labor force here? It's really around actually creating new products and growing your top line. And equally, for organizations that are very service oriented, can you actually pivot that to being a more product oriented business? So I'll give you an example. If, for example, you offer a consulting organization where you're providing guidance on how long it might take to build a wind farm, you would put a bid into an organization, say, hey guys, we're thinking of building a wind farm. It's going to be in Canada. It's going to be 50 hectares. How much will it cost and how long will it take? There'd be a collective wisdom within that organization who would all stick their finger into the wind and say, oh, that feels like a project we did before. We reckon it could take 2 years at a cost of 25 million. Imagine now, as a business owner, as a decision maker, as a CEO of an organization, if you had the ability to actually tap in to that data. It's no longer just the wisdom of crowds, a collection of experts. It's actually a more data-driven approach. And what further, if you're able to then create that into a product by being able to say, okay, we're going to make this product available and people can ask any question they want. They don't have to interact with people all of the time, but being able to add, really pivoting away from being an experience-led services organization to being a product organization is just one example of what discriminative or what generative AI is unlocking for customers and clients.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna little interjection here. I know that there was a discussion about talent and then there's been a finance discussion, but I would want to say that for my purposes, right, I'm hoping that AI really isn't going to get rid of jobs or make people redundant, but I'm hoping that it will help us unlock the power of creativity that is in the human mind, which I don't think AI has gotten to yet, despite what some people believe or want to believe about what it's capable of. Maybe someday it will. I don't think at this point it has, but I'm hoping that it's not a job displacement tool or an avenue for really undoing gains that we've made in the labor force to be more productive, but will allow us to be productive in different ways. And that's just my little, my hope for the future for AI. So we do have our poll questions completed. The first question, poll question 1, are you familiar with the difference between discriminative AI and generative AI? And we have about a 56% affirmative response, yes, and then 44% no. So I do think we should probably take a little bit of time to explain that difference.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Elizabeth. Um, just the way to think of discriminative AI is your classic spam agent on your inbox. So an email comes in and it is classified as either spam or not spam, and then you provide a feedback loop. So you're basically saying, okay, you got this one right, you got this one wrong, and the agent gets better and better over time. So it's really around how do you discriminate information? How do you classify and tag information in an automated fashion that improves and gets better over time, either through your feedback loop or a collection of feedback loops? And generative AI is really around the creation of new data from old data. So you're generating new content based on the structures and patterns of older data. Now, I'm not going to be someone who splits hair when we talk about discriminative generative AI or automation. And it's one of the things that customers ask us all of the time and say, hey, this use case, this use case is definitely generative AI, but this one is actually just discriminative AI, or this one doesn't have any AI at all. And what we're really seeing is a reimagination of the art of the possible. When you've got the accessibility of ChatGPT from OpenAI, allowing anybody to start using this technology, what it's really done is gotten the wheels turning in terms of the art of the possible around automation and technology more broadly. But for the purposes of this discussion, we won't split hairs.
Okay, and then poll question number 2 was, are you familiar with retrieval augmented generation? 33% yes and 67% no.
Okay. So for the 67% out there, it's just a tactic or a technique for how you can provide a better model accuracy from running a generative AI workflow. And the way that you do it is you would typically store your proprietary data, so information or context that's important for a specific query to be run. Before you actually pass that to a large language model, you would search, typically using a vector database, you would search your context, pull out the relevant context, add that to your initial query or inject it with your initial query so that what you're actually passing to the large language model isn't just your question prompt, but it's your question prompt augmented with context from your organization, to be more specific. And that's a technique or a tactic that we're seeing being adopted very broadly, where organizations are able to massively improve model accuracy with off-the-shelf large language models, as opposed to having to create their own foundational models with a lot of fine-tuning. So different techniques, different ways of actually getting towards the same outcome, but it's an evolving landscape.
So I think that's a very useful explanation. And one of the things that I want to get to is there's a question in the chat that I think kind of goes with one of the questions that we had sort of pre-vetted in our discussion. So I'll just ask the questions and augment with the chat question. So according to a recent S&P Global report, large companies are struggling to deploy AI. 31% remain in pilot or proof of concept stage. So the question is, what are some of the main hurdles holding businesses back from realizing return on investment for AI? And kind of relatedly, the question in the chat is, there's been a lot of discussion and examples about how large language models can use unstructured data for insightful and practical outcomes. But for more established companies, the question is, how do you incorporate into structured data the use of AI? And I guess those two things, you can answer those questions probably at the same time, right?
I'll separate them a little bit. I'll talk about the 31% of companies you mentioned that are in pilot or proof of concept stage. I think that's quite conservative based on our conversations. We're seeing a lot of customers who are still really building that muscle memory around building end-to-end generative AI workflows. I think the number one challenge is organization. I've had over 250 customer conversations now around applied generative AI, and I'm able to segment those customers in my mind between those who have sprinted way out in front, who are very comfortable not only with the technology, but with some of the data and security and privacy concerns, and those organizations that are still in the boardroom trying to figure out what their strategy could or should be for the year ahead. So a lot of it's down to organizational, and we can chat about how we solve some of those challenges shortly. There's certainly shades of blockchain at times here, which is this is novel technology. It's interesting technology. We're at the top of a hype cycle, but how is it actually going to generate enterprise value for us? So what is this going to deliver? You don't always have to know exactly what it's going to deliver, but you need to have some idea, some North Star, some guiding principles for how this is actually going to change the business if you want to align your organization to actually focusing and investing in trying these workflows out. So having that clear vision and having an idea of the use cases, just even a starting point, is really, really critical. Elizabeth, this is an area in your domain, certainly, but some of those data privacy concerns, if what we've seen really emerge from the major cloud providers over the last 6 months is indemnifying large language models that are used within their environments. So if you're training your data assets within Microsoft or AWS or Google, they will now indemnify you from any potential piracy or IP infringement type discussions. And that's certainly been a hurdle that existed last year that is now being removed. And then the other thing is that people see that this is almost like a treadmill that's getting faster and faster. So the landscape is evolving so much. Should I just sit back for 6 months because the world will be totally different again in 6 months' time? And so we're seeing that inaction is yet another impediment to people really trying these use cases. If I was to just step through maybe solving some of those challenges, and then I'll move on to the second question, Elizabeth, but organizationally, what we've seen is CEOs who are now under pressure in every single sector and in every industry in every corner of the world to come up with their AI strategy. And they're pointing to their chief revenue officer, their chief information officer, their data analytics officer, their CISO, their CTO. And it's a difficult discussion, right? Because you've got a chief revenue officer who either wants to improve his top line, or a COO or CFO who wants to reduce their bottom line in terms of cost or their cost base. And they're being asked, okay, what's the strategy? So they're turning to the CIO, and who operates at an apex between the business and technology, who's then turning to the CTO to say, what's this technology capable of? Who's then turning to the CISO to say, what are we allowed to play with? What's our policy going to look like? And there's a stalemate. So people are saying, I can't tell you what technology you can use until you tell me the policy. And I can't give you the policy until we understand how we plan to use the data. We don't know what the revenue is going to look like or the cost base is going to look like until we understand the use case. And so what we've seen leading organizations, and again, with my mental breakdown of companies that are way out in front, they've created either a virtual team or an entire AI, a C-suite head of AI type role within their organization. And they are a cross-functional team who has representation from each of those stakeholders, CIO, CISO, CTO, and they are literally reporting into the CEO and just unblocking all the blockers that are there. And it's a difficult task, but we've seen customers in as quickly as 10 weeks go from a standing start to having production like workflows, which is really impressive. So that's the organizational. From a use case perspective, I think we've seen a lot of companies have success with hosting internal hackathons. So that's a fine place to start. So what you're really doing is taking some non-proprietary, non-sensitive data, allowing people to create a safe environment, maybe in the cloud instance, and just inviting employees or colleagues or partners or universities to come in and say, hey, come up with 5 or 6 different challenges. Let's create a small prize for a winner. We've actually seen quite a bit of success with that as a model. I think on the back of that, you begin to build that muscle memory. So as you go through this choice between, am I going to have a horizontal approach or a vertical approach to generative AI, you're building that muscle memory. You're starting to see the opportunities for how the technology could be applied to existing workflows or to create new lines of revenue. That's where you start to work backwards then. So what we're seeing is people working forwards, they're taking open source technologies, they're solving functionally workflows end to end by hook or by crook. The code doesn't have to be pretty, the workflows don't have to be pretty, the technology stack doesn't have to be production grade or fully locked down. And then once they've gotten that end-to-end workflow, they've identified similar or tangential use cases, and now they're working backwards. What's the correct large language model for this outcome? What choice of vector database makes most sense? What data assets do I need? And be able to reverse back through. So that's really what we're seeing in terms of having the vision, identifying the use cases, building that muscle memory. And from a changing landscape perspective, all you can do is make sure that your data assets are AI ready. So that means you've basically created your policies and your procedures around your data so that it has the right level of permissions, authentication, and entitlements, so that only the right people are seeing the data assets that they should be seeing at an atomic level, at a row level. And that's something that is really important to have your AI, your data in an AI consumable fashion, to have it really AI ready. And the changing landscape, this is one of those adages, one of my favorite adages. The best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. And so if you're standing on the sidelines and you're trying to figure out, how do I jump onto this moving treadmill? Just jump on. Ask a partner, ask someone in the space who's providing software services to set up a call, talk you through some use cases, and just start building, taking those first little steps. So hopefully that helps, Elizabeth. I know that only answers one of the 2 questions. The second question, I believe, was around if you already have a structured data estate, then how are you going to blend that in through with unstructured data? And really, that's around the overall mission statement of anyone trying to solve generative AI use cases at scale, which is, how am I leveraging technology to harness all of the data assets at my disposal, whether it's structured or unstructured, whether it's time series data, documents, images, videos, whatever it might be. How am I able to harness all of that, not only to get the right data or information or knowledge to the right people at the right time, but to get the right wisdom to the right people at the right time, that you can make meaningful business decisions. And if your data already lives in structured data sets, fantastic. Generative AI, RAG workflows, and vector databases are there to augment your existing structured data estates. So you can run workflows that take a look at a correlation analysis between structured data that you might have and now semantic meaning from unstructured material over time. So I can give an example of that as well, Elizabeth, just to bring it to life. If you're taking a look in the domain of capital markets, if you're taking a look at investor transcripts that come out quarterly, so a company is giving, let's say Boeing as an example, is giving a quarterly update. You might want to take a look back through time to understand if the CEO is referencing supply chain shortages. Is there positive or negative sentiment about supply chain in transcripts over time? Now, that's unstructured data that you're putting into semi-structured format on the fly. And you want to run correlation statistics against your structured data estate to understand, is there some stationarity? Is there a connection between references or mentions of supply chain and then also maybe the share price or the liquidity of a specific stock? So by no means, whoever asked the question, by no means do you need to throw away your existing structured estate. This is all incremental value. And we'd love to have a chat, potentially offline, about what we could do with unstructured being added to your structured data estate.
So I'm gonna say I think I may have misled you on that question a little bit. I'll just say specifically the question is, how is context incorporated into structured data when used in AI applications? I think you answered it along the way, but again, if the person who asked that question wants to follow up with Conor, please feel free to reach out. So I have a follow-up kind of question. This was being asked in time when you were discussing, kind of the hurdles. And the question is, do you think the hardest challenge is getting senior leadership, not finance? I'm not sure what the context for that comment is. Support with the money and staffing requirements. And I think this is an interesting question, because I do think it's hard to make a business case for implementing something as nebulous as we're going to do AI, when you don't know necessarily what the end result is going to be, how it's going to increase productivity, what the end product is going to look like. But that's the question: is the hardest challenge getting senior leadership support with money and staffing requirements?
Yeah, I think it is. It's definitely a hard challenge. I think if I was in that person's shoes, I'd say to myself, does the senior leadership believe that there's a fundamental paradigm shift happening through the advent of generative AI? Or is this the top of a hype cycle and it's going to go through the trough of disillusionment for 12 months or for 2 or 3 years and then come back again? And so I think understanding where your organization is from a mindset perspective is important. I think being able to put your finger on the number of resources needed. What we've seen with successful organizations is they're not just making up budgets. They're not just sticking a finger in the wind. They're creating small, lean, applied AI teams, typically under this virtual team that I talked about, this virtual flying formation. And they're really going through the exercise of collating the meaningful use cases across their organization, picking the most impactful from either a revenue or productivity or end customer experience perspective, and delivering those as small steps with small investment. So this by no means needs to be a $5 million, $2 million, or even $1 million investment. This could be a small investment. It could be taking existing team, siphoning off 20% of their time to build out some of these use cases from a personnel perspective. A lot of the skills required are cloud skills. A lot of the technologies are cloud native. So if you have cloud skills within your organization, it's a reuse of that existing talent. There's a tremendous amount of free material available online to educate people around how to use these technologies from vector database sources, vector database vendors like ourselves, or from the big cloud providers. And then from a model perspective, certainly what we're seeing, people were creating their own foundational models initially, which is throwing all of their own data into an environment, creating their own large language models. With the advent of RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that we talked about earlier, you're able to switch in and out those large language models completely off the shelf. And really what you're focused on is how can you get model accuracy with up-to-date data without having to bet the farm on a specific use case or invest a tremendous amount of money on a specific use case. And RAG allows you to deliver on that promise. And so the number one challenge I would say that people have is actually taking the first step. When they take the first step and they begin that hackathon type experience of getting a functional end-to-end workflow, very quickly the number of use cases that they can see orthogonal or tangential to that come to life. They illuminate. And really from there, it's a prioritization discussion where you actually have a firm idea of how do you work backwards to deliver those outcomes.
Right. And then, so you kind of talked a little bit like, dipping the toe in and kind of maybe, your foot with a hackathon or something just to start, right? It seems like you can take an iterative approach. But then I guess, there's a question about what does a realistic timeline look like for AI implementation? And I think this might be a good place to sort of give a blueprint for implementing and deploying Gen AI effectively. What would you say is a realistic timeline, and what is kind of the overall blueprint?
Yeah, I think if you were to take a small use case, so leveraging existing structured data, bringing online unstructured data, blending those into a seamless workflow, you could deliver production grade workflows in 3 to 6 weeks. It doesn't have to take months. It doesn't have to take a long time at all, actually. There's so many off-the-shelf recipes that have been created, code that's pseudocode that's almost fully baked, almost fully formed, where you're just pointing it to your data assets, uh, your choice of large language model. And a lot of the impediments are around just having that initial end-to-end muscle memory. And that's, as I said, where partners and vendors can really help lean in and help deliver on behalf of organizations. So don't be shy in asking for help. Um, but yeah, 3 to 6 weeks is very realistic.
And then in terms of the blueprint, it's or I guess, maybe this is a better way or a better place for you to give examples of an integration that you've had successfully completed in an existing system, to give people an idea of what that looks like. And then for that example, what were the key factors that contribute to the success of that implementation?
Yeah, I think when people talk about the success of a generative AI implementation, when I boil it all down, each person might use their own language to describe that success. But when I think about it, it can be boiled down into four categories. It's the model accuracy. So this technology is very much a human in the loop technology still. It's not something to be automated, en masse at scale, but it's how do you augment existing human workflows. So it's really around model accuracy, which is if I pass context or if I run 100 questions to understand context, how many times does it come back with something that isn't accurate or isn't quite there or makes no sense at all? So if I run 100 questions and 10 of them come back with weird or wacky answers, I've got 90% model accuracy. And then what does the surrounding ecosystem do to improve that accuracy for me? Whether it's the choice of large language model, the cloud provider, the vector database, the embedding model, those are the parameters then that you can do to improve your model. But that's the first thing that people talk about when it comes to the success of generative AI. The second is the time to actually execute a workflow, because that's really something that's going to determine where you can insert that workflow. So if, for example, someone is running a generative AI use case that takes 20 minutes to run, then you're not going to be able to insert that into an online retail purchasing experience because nobody's going to wait 20 minutes. And so really understanding how long your queries take to execute is a secondary concern to understand where the technology can be applied. But it's a distant second to model accuracy, I have to say. The third element is the cost per query. So every time this thing runs, how much is it actually costing me? And so token consumption is the mechanism by which a lot of these workflows operate. So you take a question, you marry it to your context, you then push the prompt and the context to the large language model. And at that point, you're now paying tokens to OpenAI, as an example, or Anthropic, or whatever it might be. And so you're paying money to actually use and consume the technology. So how much is it costing you? And then the last is there an ability to scale? So if the amount of material I'm using scales up from, let's say, 500 documents to 50,000 documents, what happens to the system? Or as the number of end users move from 2 end users to 20,000 end users, what happens to the system? And so those are the four metrics for success. Elizabeth, in terms of the actual practical use cases, a lot of it is really around like a lot of it's automation. A lot of it is like tasks that would take 2 or 3 days for you to script up and put together that now can be done quite seamlessly. And the example that always comes to mind is um, I think of the a poor college graduate who's working 100 hours a week at an investment desk or at a finance desk, and he's been told on a Monday morning that there's a potential M&A deal happening at the end of the week, and to go off and to gather a whole pile of material and understand and collate information. And those are the sort of use cases that are absolutely primed for generative AI to disrupt. The ability to uh, convert raw information to knowledge that's extractable and actionable and referenceable and explainable, really importantly explainable. That is something that this technology will be able to do at scale. And that's something that our customers are working furiously towards.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of that I'm just gonna replug my earlier comment. So that poor analyst working 100 hours a week. This is where I'm hoping he gets a life, right? That he can use this technology to have, work-life balance or something approaching it, right? Instead of 100 hours, maybe it's 40 hours. Maybe it's 10 hours, who knows? But and he goes and he does, other things in his spare time. But I don't think AI at this point is going to displace all of us. I do think human in the loop is really important, even in that example, right? So for it to be explainable, for humans to make decisions about whether they're going to go through with that merger and whatnot, it has to be explainable in human terms. So I am hoping that again, it's something that is going to unleash the human potential of our workforce as opposed to displace it. So another question that came that I have for you while you were talking about it is um there are so many problems that can be solved or at least solutions can be proposed. And at this point, like you said, human in the loop, I think is absolutely important in a lot of cases. I mean, just in the legal example, I think we all heard about the lawyer who used ChatGPT to come up with the brief that he actually submitted, and the model hallucinated a couple of cases with citations and everything. Hugely embarrassing. Also, I would say probably malpractice from that lawyer for not actually doing the research or at least confirming that those cases existed. But I guess when you're looking at this, the solutions for your customers, how would you recommend they prioritize the opportunities presented by the technology for their own industry and organizational needs? Like, how do they find those highest best use cases to start with? If they're paying by token, like how do you make sure that you're getting the right that you're getting your ROI, right? That you think that like you're going to spend this money doing it. Are you using it the best way, or people just using it in their spare time to ask questions like, what's the best way to take care of a cat, or what, random things that are obviously not, going to provide value for the organization.
Yeah, I think, and again, just mind mapping success from our successful customers, from customers who are still in planning mode. It's really the remit of that head of AI or head of applied AI to gather and create a catalog of the potential use cases. And then to create their, I suppose, depending on their company and their risk appetite, understanding first and foremost the enterprise value promise. So is this going to generate enterprise value internally or externally with customers and clients? And then figuring out, okay, what's the effort involved? Do you have the right skills and technology at hand to actually deliver on it? And then what's the probability of success, and coming up with some weighted score? So, very pragmatic approach to figuring out which use cases should be prioritized. And I just can't emphasize enough that there's an entire ecosystem of system integrator partners who will always take a first call for free or provide some advisory because they want to be the ones to actually deliver on these outcomes for you or help you deliver these outcomes. So engaging with the cloud providers, with the software vendors, with the system integrators, with the ISVs, with the OEMs, like you're going to be, I guarantee everyone who's attending this session is inundated with companies who promise to be the best, the fastest, the easiest to use AI company that they'll ever work with. Reply to the email and say, hey, want to set up 30 minutes of your time? I want your applied AI lead on the call. It's going to be under strict NDA. We're going to chat through 3 or 4 use cases, and we want to see your recommendations back. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Not necessarily pay for help, but ask for that help initially, and really partner with people. One of the traits that I've seen with organizations who are trying to solve everything in isolation is that they're slipping on banana skins that other people in the ecosystem have seen. And so if you want to short circuit the time to value or the time to production, being able to learn from the mistakes of others is always a key concept. So that would be my advice to everybody.
So I'm going to ask this last question. We only have a few minutes left, but so you're obviously familiar with the potential business value of generative AI in customer and employee experiences, operational efficiency, and things like that. But is there an application we're not talking about enough at this point in time? What's on the horizon, really, when it comes to Gen AI?
Yeah, I think for companies that have vast stockpiles of proprietary information, the ability to monetize that information is going to change radically. And so I work on a Windows machine. I'm looking at the bottom left. It says type here to search. It'll be type here to prompt. And then I'm going to have modules almost like my home television. I've got my Netflix subscription, my Hulu, my Amazon Prime. I'm going to have my subscription to the New York Times. I'm going to have my subscription to Bloomberg. And so I'm going to be actually leveraging services in a new way. The way that you actually consume information from data providers in the loosest sense, I think is going to change radically through the desktop experience. And I think there's a role for everybody, not just Microsoft, but for every major player to think about the data assets at their disposal and how they can, in a very safe way, actually expose not the underlying information, but the underlying context to allow other people to leverage that context. So context as a service. Being more technical, it's more around vector embeddings as a service, which is something that we're seeing really as a new horizon arriving this coming year.
Are we also going to probably be seeing, I don't know, prompt writing as a skill set on job descriptions for people? Is it going to be, are people going to be offering courses in that? It's kind of a question I think that a lot of people are like, I don't even know the first thing about how to, use the tool, right? There are different levels of acumen in prompt writing. So just curious about that. What do you see the future for that?
Yeah, I think that was a lot of the hype last year. And I think over the last kind of 3 months or so, I think what people are seeing is things like data poisoning or other tactics or techniques where companies are or not companies, nefarious individuals are leaving data to be scraped on the internet. And that data, once scraped, actually contains ways to push information or extract information from an organization. So I think the entire role of cybersecurity and security and privacy and policy, which is your domain, Elizabeth, and I was keen to ask you a quick question before we jump off. But I think that's something that people are there's going to be an emerging ecosystem of data defenders out there, ensuring that your corporate data and your personal data are safeguarded, because there's going to be an explosion in the ways that people can actually extract information in nefarious ways.
I agree with that. Absolutely. We have less than a minute remaining, but I do think that that's important. And I think that the nefarious actors, they seem to have a lot of time on their hands. They're definitely out there. I think they're always going to be out there because there's unfortunately money to be made, whether it's from state actors or just other people who have malintent. But it's important, I think, for companies to be aware of all the ways that they're using the data And to your earlier point, right, having some governance around that and making sure that they're protecting not just the assets themselves, but the context around it, right? Like, are you using it appropriately? Do you have the permission to use it this way? Is it the right thing to do? Right? There's an ethical consideration here because we know how data can be used inequitably and for purposes that are not what was intended, and that's always going to be, I think, an issue. And I think there's going to be a constant sort of push to keep the data safe against those malintended individuals. But we're out of time now. Brittany's asking me to turn it back to her, which I will do at this moment. Brittany.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Elizabeth and Connor, for such an excellent fireside chat. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. Thank you again, Connor and Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Elizabeth, again.
You too.